Jeremiah chapter 2 from verse 1 on to chapter 3 till verse 5. So there is, well, according to these scholars, the numbering of the chapters is really not in line with the sermon. But the chaptering was done very much later, so they have a problem with it. So that's why we do parts of one chapter and it continues to parts of the next chapter. In this chapter, this passage is not very polite. So I've written some, but I have not written the others, but I will do the rest of the chapters first. Okay, chapter 2, beginning at verse 21. God said, I have planted thee a noble vine, wholly a right seed. How then art thou turned into the degenerate plant of a strange vine unto me? You're from good stock. Make no mistake, a good vine, and I expect a good fruit. But somehow there was a problem there. You degenerated and not produced good fruit, good grapes, but degenerate grapes that is not fit for consumption. That's how he equates the faithlessness. Actually, this passage is written to Israel, albeit Israel by this time of Jeremiah is already gone. It's been decimated and destroyed by the Assyrians. So most of the inhabitants have been deported to live in the other parts of the Assyrian Empire. And some of them possibly have moved down south to Judah. Understand that Jeremiah lives in Judah, in Jerusalem. And this is his sermon, well, really his first sermon in Jerusalem after his call. Okay, but he lays out what's wrong with Israel. See, this is, we do not follow the example. This is why they were destroyed by God, their faithlessness. First, God planted them as a good vine, but they didn't produce good fruit. Secondly, now this is not very polite. Verse 24, a wild ass used to the wilderness that snuffeth up the wind her pleasure in her occasion. Who can turn her away? All that seek her will not weary themselves in her month. They shall find her. It's like, it's not very, if you really want to know what this is, if we've lived in a village, we understand that when animals, dogs, when bitches are on heat, they send off a scent. And it's not difficult to find her. Like, the male, whoa, there's a bitch on heat here. And not just that, the bitch, doesn't run away in her occasion. During her occasion, it says there, she doesn't, you don't have to weary yourself to run after her. She will seek you. Imagine, okay, now we know that's the animal kingdom, but imagine equating Israel, the people of Israel being like that. It's like, that's not very polite. But, and, also a thief is ashamed when he's found, but so the house of Israel ashamed, and their kings, their princes, their priests, and their prophets, they are not ashamed. In fact, they turned to a stock and said, thou art my father, to a stone. Whoa, thou hast brought me forth. So they turned to inanimate objects and said, you're my father, you're my God. It's like, what's wrong with these people? And because of that, God's anger turned against them. And that's why they went into exile. They were destroyed by the Assyrians. So what's that got to do with the passage? But later on in the next chapter, it will tell Judah, see what they did and they were punished, but you are doing the same. Take heed, repent, turn. That's what chapter 2 is all about. And here, this is like I said, this is Jeremiah's first sermon. It asks more questions of the people in Jerusalem than answers. God compares his relationship with Israel as that of a marriage. See, God has always given us the imagery that he's the husband, Israel is the bride. Just as Jesus said, I'm the groom The church is the bride. See, there is a covenantal relationship, right from Genesis, the man and the woman. There's a covenant, there's what they call loyalty and a troth. We still in modern marriage, I pledge thee my troth. See, what is that? My hesed in the Hebrew, that all of me, what I am, my loyalty and everything. See, that is the relationship between a man and a woman in marriage, and that's how God organized himself too. As there is this troth between you and I. This hesed as sacred as a holy matrimony. That's what we call it, holy matrimony. Thus saith the Lord. And also God has always given us the imagery that he is the husband, Israel as the bride, and Jeremiah then looks back to Exodus and the wilderness period in verse 2. Remember, it wasn't that long ago, when the groom took you, Israel, as my bride, and then you followed me in the desert. That was the honeymoon period. You followed me where there was no distraction there. A land that is not sown, in Canaan, it's a land that is sown where there's agriculture, and now there's distraction, there's profit, the more grain I plant, the more I spend in my field, I get more, and therefore we forget our God. Thus saith the Lord, I remember thee, the kindness of thy youth. I remember the times we were in the desert, the love of thy espousals, when thou wentest after me in the wilderness, in a land that is not sown. But you don't look for me anymore. Verse 6, you don't look for me anymore, neither said they, where is the Lord that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, that led us through the wilderness, through a land of drought and of the shadow of death, through a land that no man passed through and where no man dwelt. You see, you don't remember that anymore. You don't ask, where's that Lord? We need to continue to worship him. Verse 3, God has also always think of Israel as his firstborn and as the first fruits, the metaphor of first fruits of his increase. To offer up the first fruits is very important. Israel is the first fruit. You offer up your first fruit of the harvest, and that God it to God, and God it to the priests, and God is pleased and blessed the rest of the harvest. So Israel, chosen out of many nations, is the first fruits to guarantee the rest of the harvest. That means the nations, you and I, a huge, plentiful, abundant harvest that will come to the Lord. See, to offer out the first fruits, it's important. It means a guarantee of a plentiful harvest. Also, the verse ends in, all that devour him shall offend, evil shall come upon them, saith the Lord. So that means once you offer up your first fruits, the Lord will bless the rest of the harvest, and he will destroy the devourer of your crops, and thus guaranteeing an abundant harvest. And it is it is a guarantee that God will protect the harvest from pests. This is something they understood when they went into Canaan. So we have to think, who is God speaking to? Who is the audience? So he used imagery, he used metaphors that they understand. And I'm also, crop failure spells famine, hunger, and death. And I'm reminded of my favorite chapter in Malachi 3, where God says, bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, saith the Lord, and I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes. And he shall not destroy the fruits of your ground, neither shall your vine cast its fruits, saith the Lord of hosts. So these are examples. These examples are mostly agrarian because they became farmers once they settled in Canaan. Here there are at least 16 questions. It is God saying, why? Why have you forsaken me? Why don't you remember the time in the desert, Exodus? Why? Chapter 2, 1 to 13 begins with a honeymoon. Remember, espousal, God and Israel as a husband and wife together, the honeymoon period. And then once they went to Canaan, what happens? It ends in chapter 3, 1 to 5 with divorce. And God always figured himself as groom and Israel as the bride. A similar situation, like I said, where Jesus figures himself as the groom and the church is the bride. So when vows are broken, when the covenantal relationship is broken, it's much more than broken laws as much as a broken relationship, broken promises, and a broken heart, that of God. We know how painful that is. We have some time or other in our lives experienced that. So verse 5, first saith the Lord. So Lord is asking Israel, what iniquity have your fathers found in me, that they've gone so far from me? Did I offend you or something? Verse 6, they forget the time when we were happiest. Remember the first, the honeymoon years of your marriage. Neither said they, where is the Lord that brought us out of the land of Egypt? So the chapter goes back and forth between the covenantal relationship between the Lord and his people. Verse 3 also says, Israel was holiness unto the Lord and the first fruits of his increase. So there's this relationship between God and his people. It goes back and forth, thinking the imagery goes from being husband and wife to being the first fruits and so on. But my people have left me, the one true God. Verse 13, they, my people, have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewn them out cisterns, broken cisterns that hold no water. So it is like a farmer who has a land to grow crops, and he has a spring in there. It's like, wow, a spring. In that entire area, it's like water is so important. Without water, there's no crops. There's hunger, famine, and destruction. So, and death. So if you have a spring, what's a spring? Water comes out continuously, but instead they ignore it. God being the living water, the spring of living water, instead they hewn for themselves cisterns, that means huge containers out of terracotta, out of clay to hold water, and you put into the ground. There's still some, in places where you don't have a spring, that's what you have to do, so that when the rain comes, it drops into the cistern, it holds water. Hopefully that's enough to last for the dry months. So, but these things is broken cisterns. What happens? You sink to the ground, there's always ground movement, they crack and they leak, and you have to keep filling it, and it will hold water. Broken cisterns, and you have a spring, but heck, what do? You ignore it, you hate it. Instead, hewn for yourself, cisterns are broken. And it begins, so they see the imagery, right? It should make sense to them. Imagine how precious water is in that part of the world. Instead, like I said, he makes huge terracotta cisterns, which breaks and doesn't hold water, which leaks. And they go after worthless idols. They said to the stone, to the stock, you're my father, to the stone, you're my God. It's like, what the? To worthless things and call them gods, where this one true God telling you, why? But instead they go after worthless things and become worthless themselves. Not just them, the priest, the leaders, the princess, the prophets, they all do the same. Why? They go after Baal worship. This fertility cult is really attractive in today's world too. We don't have, but with porn and with all kinds of